Fresh allegations have emerged of secret CIA prisons around the world and violations that have allegedly been taking place there. A New York-based NGO funded by one of America's richest men, George Soros, has unveiled a report which claims to detail the operation of these so-called black sites. Artis Ganachikhan has the details.
This is a very comprehensive report prepared by the Open Society Foundations. Not only do they detail torture techniques that were used at CIA's secret prisons overseas, the so-called black sites, but also give a list of countries that one way or another participated in CIA's secret detention and extraordinary rendition operations, including by hosting CIA prisons on their territories, detaining, interrogating, torturing, and abusing individuals, assisting in the capture and transport of detainees, and so on. So the list includes countries like Afghanistan, Australia, Canada, Denmark, Djibouti, Egypt, Georgia, Germany, Syria, Turkey, Italy, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, Yemen, and other countries. While President Bush acknowledged that the CIA had secretly detained about 100 prisoners, and this report alleges that there were more, the U.S. government had only identified 16 high-value detainees. Italy is the only country where the court has criminally convicted officials for the involvement in extraordinary rendition operations. Canada is the only country to issue an apology to an extraordinary rendition victim, Maher Arar, who was rendered to and tortured in Syria. And only 3 countries, in addition to Canada, Sweden, Australia, and the United Kingdom, have issued compensation to extraordinary rendition victims. And this report is ripe with human rights abuses. And it's clear that high-ranking Bush administration officials bear responsibility for authorizing human rights violations. And yet, no one was prosecuted because the U.S. government has classified everything related to its torture practices. And any accusation would be dismissed on state secrets grounds.
Now let's get some reaction from journalist and historian Douglas Valentine. He's joining me live now from the US. You've done a lot of research on secret CIA prisons. What have you been able to uncover, and what evidence are your findings based on?
Well, certainly, just begin by saying that the fact that the CIA has organized, that the U.S. through the CIA organized and managed this global terror network is a war crime of epic proportions. But even more disturbing is the fact that the complicity of so many politicians and secret services in foreign countries sends a clear signal through the news that this simply exists, sends a clear signal that the United States is functioning as something of a virtual dictatorship, that it's able to and capable and willing of punishing other people for things that it's quite willing to do itself. And that's
let me just quickly ask you. You say a war crime taking place here. Well, now that all these allegations have been made public, what's it going to take to press charges and bring anyone to account if they are indeed deemed as illegal?
The same sort of thing that happened during the Vietnam War. You have to understand that the CIA doesn't do these things as a sort of rogue elephant. It has the, it's authorized by the U.S. Congress, by certain very important Congress people who believe that they are reflecting the will of the American people. In the wake of 9/11, there was a huge outcry in America for vengeance, for the United States to prove, for the government to prove that it was more terrible than the people who had launched the 9/11 attack. And so Congress, believing that it reflected the will of the American people, authorized the CIA to do this. So the only thing that will stop it is not any international court. It's simply the will of the American people doing what it did, for example, during Vietnam. During the Vietnam War, when it had enough of the government killing millions of Vietnamese, that the people just rose up and opposed the government.
Of course, there are many who will argue, they'll say, look, surely, and you mentioned 9/11, surely the detention and interrogation of terror suspects has been a necessary precaution since then on the so-called war on terror. Hasn't it made the world a safer place with these detention centres?
you know, that's debatable. The thing that's a problem is that since 9/11, the government has been able to maintain this attitude, the attitude that you're just sort of expressing, that it's required for security to commit crimes, and this has never been necessary before. And what it exhibits is that, what it illustrates is that the government is, since 9/11, more capable of propagandizing the American people by exaggerating the threats that exist in order to perpetuate, which probably is a state of emergency that really doesn't exist, in which the government's able to portray the United States, the greatest military power that ever existed on the planet Earth, as somehow a victim, or the person that's being bullied, when the truth is exactly the opposite.
But, of course, some may say that this state of emergency does exist. Although Osama bin Laden, he's been killed, that hasn't actually stopped al-Qaeda. Radicalism is they're now on the rise across the Muslim world. And with those circumstances, isn't America's so-called war on terror still justified and going to go on and on?
Absolutely not, because the war on terror itself is an overstatement, vast overstatement of the dangers that exist. It's been proven in Afghanistan that we simply created more enemies. In Iraq, we've created more enemies. The war on terror is a war, and war, killing, torturing, detaining people is not a way to to resolve problems. The way to resolve problems is through people trying to understand each other, to reach accommodations, to do things diplomatically. Except the situation that exists right now is that the United States has the military upper hand, and it's not willing to give that up. By having the military upper hand, it can enforce its will all around the world. And the war on terror is simply a simple pretext for doing that.
Douglas, we'll leave it there. Really interesting to hear your thoughts on this. Live from the US, author and historian Douglas Valentine. Thank you for being with us here on RT.